Ready to backfill here soon. We got rain coming tonight, so at that point before it was supposed to rain and then the packer broke down, backfilling and stepping up and out of this hole we're in.
All right, guys, there's 5 common reasons why retaining walls across the United States fail. It doesn't matter what part of the country you're in, the 5 things that I'm going to list, you're going to see, no matter from the Midwest, from the East to the North to the South to every part of the United States. These are the 5 most common things you need to keep your eyes open for when you hire a contractor to come out and build your retaining wall, or if you are a contractor, to watch to make sure that your subcontractors and your employees are doing properly, because this is why they're falling down, guys. Let's hit it.
All right. Show this job site a little bit. Making a little progress. Pretty steep here. The wall in so far. Up to this point. Getting ready to backfill here soon. We got rain coming tonight, so trying to get this built up. We'll go one more course and then start backfilling, prepping for rain.
Cheap block, that's the number 5 reason. This is where a lot of contractors like to cut corners and buy the cheapest thing they possibly can. Now, if you are a customer, a couple of the things you want to keep your eyes and ears open for are block that are not hollow. And a lot of times a block will look solid, but will actually be hollow from the bottom side. And this is where you go to those big box stores, you'll see the blocks are hollow. You actually have to take the block, flip it upside down, and what you'll find a lot of times is there's a core underneath there. That hollow core is put there specifically to make the blocks lighter so they're easier to handle, less material so they cost less. But what happens with those hollow blocks from the bottom under is, especially if you're in Minnesota, you get a freeze-thaw cycle and your water will actually sit under here, and as the water freezes, it expands. When it thaws, it contracts. Freeze thaw, freeze thaw. So your retaining wall is constantly in a state of doing this. And in the beginning, it should look just fine. But after years of doing that, your blocks will start to shift, they'll start to get kittywampus, they'll start to get crooked, and your wall will fail because the bottom block and the top block above it are not properly seated and properly connected. So they're basically just slapped on top of each other and laying there. A good block is a solid block. This is where we use these Versalock standard units. It's solid and it's pinned, so it has holes in it specifically lined up to allow you to drive a pin from one to the other. My daddy always taught me that if you want to build something and you want it to last, you're going to put a lag bolt in it, you're going to put a screw in it, or you're going to put a nail in it. If you just slap 2 things together, lick them and stick them and say that ain't going nowhere, well, it's probably going somewhere. So make sure that you got a good block that has a good pinning system, and that is the number 1 thing. Now, it's not number 1. It's the number 5 thing to look for when you're getting your retaining walls built. Make sure you know what block you're getting and you choose that block. And if you're a contractor, your reputation rides on you getting a good block. For me, it's cheap insurance. It does cost more, but you can charge more for a better block. If you're pinching pennies because of the block you use, you're basically on a race to the bottom because you're gonna be cutting corners everywhere to get that job, and it's not gonna be good for you. But let's move on to number 4.
All right. Finally to the point where we're backfilled now. Yesterday we were at that point before it was supposed to rain, and then the packer broke down. Got ourselves a nice little replacement packer here. The Bow Mag, looks pretty good. Coming along, a couple more courses to go.
I've seen some of the best contractors, well, in theory, they were the best contractors. In reputation, best contractors, building some of the biggest retaining walls, do this mistake, and it's right here. Using the wrong drainage and the wrong base material. This is freaking huge, and where a lot of retaining walls fail. If you have a contractor show up at your site using P-rock, and that's what they're gonna base your wall on, or they're gonna use it for your drainage zone, fire them right there. It's the worst possible thing you can do, because P-rock, as water flows through it, P-rock rolls and moves. It doesn't have enough weight to it, and it has the wrong shape to lock together. What we always use is 3/4 clear. So no matter what happens when we use a 3/4 inch stone and it's angular in nature, no matter which way you put it down, these rocks lock together. Just by their very nature, no matter what you do, they lock together. Where with P-rocks, when you try to put them together, they roll, they move, and they go all over. That's what happens when you get a lot of water running through a retaining wall. Behind that retaining wall, those rocks are rolling. They're actually loosening up the soil behind the retaining wall, and that's allowing the fines in the soil to then migrate. It's actually loosening up the soil behind it. So as the rocks are rolling, the silt is then coming out of it because of the movement of the rocks. You need a 3/4 inch or larger stone for both your base and for your drainage zone. Now, some people will say that you can use a concrete base. I would not. I would not use a concrete base for underneath the retaining wall. Some people will also say that you can use class 5, and you can use class 5. The reason I like 3/4 clear for my base is it does allow the water to flow through it and not stay underneath your retaining wall. One of those myths that I want to dispel, I said I was going to dispel some myths. There's contractors that are going out and doing commercial work that don't even get this next point. When you butt up to a building like this with your retaining wall, you do not, and I repeat this, do not physically connect the retaining wall to the structure you're butting up to. So if I'm building a wall up to this structure, I don't pin that into the structure. I don't physically connect the wall. The wall has to be its own separate entity, because in different parts of the country, if I physically connect to this structure, I then have to go to the depth of the frost footings of the structure I'm connecting to. So if I'm going to put a retaining wall up to a structure and it has a 4-foot frost footing, I have to bury that structure 4 feet down and pin it the entire way. Retaining walls are designed to float separately from any structures. Now we've still got 3 more points to go, so let's move on to those next. Now when you get over 4 foot tall with your retaining wall, or there's going to be a surcharge on that wall, you need to engineer that wall no matter what height it is. Now let's be very descriptive about what we're talking about. In this video, you see us putting geogrid behind this retaining wall. The reason you see us putting grid into this retaining wall is because our retaining wall is going to be over 4 foot tall. It's been designed by a licensed and certified engineer and then ran through the city for permits, and then we get all the appropriate inspections done. When you need to take these extra steps is when we're talking about that surcharge. And a surcharge can be any kind of additional weight behind the retaining wall above and beyond a flat level surface. So when you get a retaining wall that's over 4 foot tall, you're going to engineer it. But if the retaining wall isn't even 4 foot tall, but it's going to have a slope on the top of it, you may need to look at getting that engineered and have geogrid in it. Or if you have a structure like a house or a parking lot or any kind of a shed, any kind of a structure that's going to put additional weight onto the soil that retaining wall holds up, get it engineered and then get your geogrid put in place. This is where a lot of guys fail because they avoid this step. They're afraid of it. And if they're afraid of it, it's because they're not experienced with it. But now I'm getting a little bit ahead of the game because we're going to talk about the number one reason why retaining walls fail in just a few moments. We're still on number 3, but I've already alluded to the number one reason.
All right, a little more progress on the wall today. Got her up pretty close to height. Just backfilling and stepping up and out of this hole we're in.
Number 2, compaction is king. Compaction makes all the difference in the world. When you build something, I don't care how tall it is, I don't care what you're building, but if your soil is going to move, whatever you're placing on top of that soil is going to fail. And understanding compaction is a critical element to the overall long-term success of your retaining wall. If you've ever driven around the country and you've noticed retaining walls that are double terraced, where there's one terrace on top of another terrace, and especially where those terraces divide, you're gonna see sometimes, you may have seen that wall take a dip. Or anytime that you've seen the wall take a dip, it means that it's not been compacted properly. Here's a little known fact about retaining walls. Our retaining wall, when it's built properly, you can take the face of the retaining wall off from it, and that soil should remain in place. Let me give you a little bit more description about it. So in this case, on this retaining wall over here, I could remove all of these blocks. Now this wall is like a decade old or 15 years old. I don't even know how old it is. I could remove all of these blocks, and the soil behind this retaining wall should not move because I've properly compacted it. I've put in the right amount of engineering, the geogrid. I've got the drainage aggregate. The only thing that this block is actually holding back is erosion at this point. It's almost like the face of this block is lipstick I'm slapping on a pig. I'm just putting this in front of all of the engineering and work that I've done on the soil behind the retaining wall that allows me to hold up a structure. Now this is an example of a surcharge. We talked about it earlier. It's just a deck, but it's still putting additional load onto my retaining wall. So this retaining wall was engineered to handle that weight. And if I remove the block from this, the soil is still engineered to handle that weight. So a good retaining wall uses not just good building practices with your retaining wall block, but a good retaining wall, the right retaining wall, or the way a retaining wall should be done, also works on the soil behind it. So as you watch this video, you notice Tim spending a lot of time making sure that the soil behind it is compacted right, is set in place right, and there's certain tricks that we are doing in this retaining wall that I don't recommend for you guys to do. And what you see us doing, when I say I don't recommend you guys doing it, because this is kind of some advanced techniques. We know what we're doing. We've been building walls for 25 plus years, big walls, massive retaining walls. We'll go multiple tiers up, we'll flip that grid over the face, then we'll backfill, and when we get to the level where the grid is, we'll roll that grid back down, then we'll continue up, putting our drainage aggregate in and our backfill material. But this allows us to not switch gears so often, not to put 1 or 2 courses in, then put dirt in, 1 or 2 courses, then dirt. We actually have it designed down to the point where we can put multiple courses in and then backfill, but we also know what we're doing. So just be cautious if you're going to attempt to do what you see us doing in this video. It's not principles, it's not things that I would recommend if you're new to retaining walls. But if you're an old dog and been around that block a few times, you're probably looking at what we're doing going, yeah, that's right. And the number one reason why retaining walls fail is contractors don't care enough about their end product, and they care more about their profits. And what that leads to is cutting corners across all of the points that I've just mentioned, using cheaper block, not using the proper engineering or geogrid, using P-rock instead of the standard kind of rock because P-rock costs a little bit less. I lost a bid on a job, And I happened to stop out to the job while the other company was building the retaining wall. What I found they were using was CMU units, concrete masonry units. These were hollow blocks that were designed for foundation walls. They had no base material at all. They were just raw dogging it, putting it right on the dirt. They had zero drainage aggregate behind it, and there was no connection method from one block to the other block. This is what the difference is a contractor that cares is going to take all the proper steps. And here's why you contractors should care. You are responsible for anything you build. It has to be built right for up to 10 years. You don't have to give a warranty. If you build a retaining wall and that wall fails, and they have a licensed engineer come out and certify that you did not build that wall correctly, you are still responsible for that retaining wall up to 10 years later. You have to build it right out of the gate. It's cheaper to do it right in the beginning than to try to scramble and fix something later on. Don't do that. But those are the 5 reasons why retaining walls fail. Let's go back over them from 1 to 5 one more time. Number 5, using cheap blocks, hollow from the bottom, or any other kind of a cheap block that has an inferior connection method. Number 4, using the wrong drainage and wrong base material, using P-rock versus a 3/4 clear angular stone. P-rock is usually cheaper, it's usually easier to get, it's easier to handle, it's easier to shovel, and a lot of times it's what contractors migrate towards because it's just plain easier. Building retaining walls is not easy stuff. Number 3, GeoGrid. Not using GeoGrid when you need GeoGrid, not compensating for the fact that you have a surcharge on your wall. If it's over 4 foot tall, you're gonna have to go toward GeoGrid, or at least look at, do you need it? Or if it has a surcharge, you will need a GeoGrid. This is surcharge can be a slope onto a retaining wall, or a surcharge can be a building or a structure like you see, or a parking lot on a retaining wall. All those add additional weight to the retaining wall, so compensating for that surcharge. Number 2, compaction. Not understanding compaction, having inferior compaction, not using enough compaction. It's all about compaction. When you're building larger retaining walls, make sure you're compacting the heck out of it. Compaction is cheap, cheap, cheap insurance, so use it. And number 1, caring. Cutting corners, and versus, instead of doing things right, you cut corners. This is the worst possible thing because you are, as a contractor, on the hook for up to 10 years. If one of your walls fails and a licensed engineer comes out and looks at it and says, yeah, this wall was never built right in the first place, it doesn't matter if you gave a warranty or not, because you as a contractor responsible for making sure that you build things the right way on day 1. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. God bless, go get them. Hope you guys build some good retaining walls for your customers, and if you're a customer, I hope you get a good contractor that builds you something the right way.